Attention! This makes absolutely no sense. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Zander's Facts.
Hello, everybody. Welcome into the latest edition of the Zander's Facts podcast. I am, of course, the aforementioned Zander. It is episode 121 of the podcast here on Wednesday, October 18th, 2023. Thank you all so much for listening. If you are a basketball fan, then this podcast is for you, y'all, because it is October, and that means that the National Basketball Association is about to start its new season, and there's only one man we could bring on the podcast to talk about the NBA. It's actually contractually required that if we talk about the NBA on this podcast, this guest must be on. It is our Zander's Facts senior NBA analyst, Hillbilly. He is back on the podcast this week to preview everything going on in the NBA, because it was a pretty eventful offseason. Hillbilly would gladly tell you. And so we got a lot of facts to get to, previewing all 30 teams and predicting who we think is going to win the championship at the end of the year. So, of course, you're not going to win and miss all those facts. We've got them for you in just a second here on this podcast. But before we do, I just wanted to remind you all that if you like the Zander's Facts podcast, if you think you're going to like all the facts on this week's edition, remember to follow this podcast, download this episode 121, rate and review the podcast, and check us out on all the socials, Twitter, Threads, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, at Zander's Facts, that's Zander with a Z. Most importantly, remember to tell all your friends, spread the facts, Zander's Facts podcast, tell all your friends about the podcast, the newsletter, Zander's Weekend Facts, if you didn't know. It's a recap of the week's top headlines. It comes out every Sunday morning. I write it. It is amazing. It is free to sign up. Check that out in this episode's description. Also, check out the Zander's Facts link tree, also linked in the episode's description, because it has all the Zander's Facts links that you need for everything Zander's Facts. And also remember to listen to any of our past Zander's Facts episodes, because y'all, I have been looking at the numbers recently on our podcast hosting platform, and y'all have been going crazy with the downloads. I mean, this is by far, in the last week, the most downloads we've had of the Zander's Facts podcast. That's how y'all support the podcast, y'all, is by downloading each and every episode, and then you can delete it from your device like the next day or the week later. I think it still counts. But if you download it for like a day, then you're supporting the facts. And I love that, so thank you all so much.
That's cool.
And now you all can download this episode too. How about that? Let's get to it, though, because our main event this week is talking about the NBA. It's our annual NBA season preview. The season starts in less than a week, Tuesday, the 24th of October, so we got to get on it, y'all. We got a lot of facts with our Zander's Facts NBA analyst, Hillbilly. He's on the podcast this week, so let's get to it right now as the Zander's Facts podcast continues.
Zander's Facts.
Welcome back, everybody, to episode 121 of the Zander's Facts podcast, or as we know it, when this guest comes on this podcast this time of year, the podcast that explains why the Bucks will win the NBA Finals.
Ugh.
It is, this week, our Zander's Facts senior NBA analyst, Hillbilly. He's back on the podcast to preview the NBA season, which, as I just said earlier, starts this Tuesday. So we got to get rolling. Hillbilly, welcome back to the podcast. How are you?
I'm great. I love this time of year. We are exactly this time next week. We will be watching real NBA basketball.
Ugh, not preseason junk.
Not preseason or summer league.
Actual games that matter. And
Right.
we'll get to hear Charles Barkley's voice, which is always just a treat to the ears, you know?
Yeah, I've missed it.
Okay, so this is our fourth NBA season that we're talking about on the podcast, which is like insane. It's our third edition of our season preview podcast. Hillbilly has been on all of those. And last year in the NBA, for the first time in franchise history, the Denver Nuggets won the NBA championship last season. They ran away from the rest of the pack with Nikola Jokic, who wasn't the league MVP last year, but then, after the playoffs happened, maybe he should have been for the third straight time. But they won't get away with that this season, I don't think, because we've got several teams in the East and the West who are reloaded for what should be an exciting title race at the top of the NBA. So, as we said, the NBA season tips off in less than a week. So we've got a ton to talk about. We're going to have a lot of facts, both Hillbilly and I, on, we're basically going to talk all 30 teams. And then, of course, as always you expect from the Zander's Facts podcast, we're going to give you our early preseason predictions, which always turn out to be correct, on who is going to win the NBA title and who's going to make the playoffs too.
Let's do it.
So Hillbilly, before we talk about the teams, though, before we break down the 30 teams, we should probably talk about something that's new on the season calendar this year. The NBA in-season tournament, which we've talked about a little bit before on this podcast, I think, but it's actually going to happen this season, and it's kind of going to, shape the calendar in the early part of the season. So, before I get your thoughts on it, for those who don't know, the NBA in-season tournament is basically, how is it going to work? Every team in the NBA is going to be in it. Every team has been drawn into 6 groups of 5 teams, so there's 3 groups per conference, based on their records from the previous regular season. There's going to be 4 designated nights in November where the teams are going to play their group games. It's going to be every Tuesday and Friday between November 3rd and 28th, except for Election Day, because they don't play games on Election Day, the NBA. Very patriotic.
America!
Each team is going to have 2 games at home, 2 on the road, and they're going to face every other team once in their group. And these games, they're not just going to count for the in-season tournament, they're also going to count for the regular season record. So they have a double meaning. And so the 6 teams that win their group, that at the end of the group stage have the best record, they advance to the knockout rounds, along with 2 other teams who, one team in each conference that finishes second in their group but has the best group play record out of the second place teams. And they've got a bunch of tiebreakers too to sort that out if the records are the same. So you've got the quarterfinals and the knockouts, which are going to be played in home arenas on December 4th and 5th. And then you've got the semifinals and the championship, which are going to be played on a neutral site in Las Vegas, December 7th and 9th. And the winner of the championship game is going to win the first ever NBA Cup. What a name. They really dug deep to figure out that one.
Very creative.
I know. All teams are going to continue to play 82 regular season games. The teams that don't make it to the knockouts are going to have 2 more games that are scheduled later in the year, and 1 more game for teams that advance out of the quarterfinals. They only make the semifinals. And then the 2 teams that make the championship are actually going to play 83 games. So how about that? So basically, it's kind of a new facet to the NBA calendar, Hillbilly. How do you think it's really going to impact the early part of the season? Are teams going to care, you think?
It's a good question. I don't know. I feel like, and we talked about this a little bit before we started, it's the kind of thing that is going to mean a lot more in 10 years than it does now. I think if Adam Silver's smart, he's smart enough to realize that, like, right out of the gate, most people are not going to care a ton about this. It takes a while for things to kind of gain some cachet with the fans, have people kind of buy into it, decide they actually care about it. But, they're incentivizing it with money that should at least get the not super rich NBA players. They're probably not going to care about that kind of money, but a lot of the other players will. So hopefully it'll incentivize some better regular season play. And maybe in a few years it really catches on. I probably won't be paying too much attention to it, though.
Oh, you'll watch the championship game, though.
Well, I'll watch it. If it's on, I'll watch it. But, I'm not because it's the in-season tournament. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'll love it. Who knows?
Maybe. I feel like, because we talked about this earlier, how Adam Silver's a big soccer fan, and they're kind of modeling this after how soccer is, where you have the domestic league, and then you have the Champions League, which is the whole continent. And obviously we don't have, additional teams playing outside of the US and Canada in this, but kind of, how when you play for the UEFA Champions League in European soccer, you're not really playing for the money. The team obviously gets a whole lot of money, but the fact that it's the Champions League and, the pride and cachet that it has, I think that's what the NBA is kind of banking on. And obviously the big difference is, you're only playing the same teams. So already right there, it's kind of, negating.
Yeah, it doesn't have the novelty of it, really.
Yeah. But I feel we'll figure it out. We haven't even played a game.
Well, if
So
the
we'll
players
see.
wind up buying into it, it will make it more interesting. The fans will eventually buy into it too. And, you know, there's no real risk. Like, what's the worst thing that can happen? Nobody cares about it. In a couple of years, they just drop it.
Yeah, because again, you're not adding games. Like the only games you're adding is one, and you're playing
Right.
for a championship.
Right.
So yeah, that's just something new that you're probably going to hear about if you're listening, talking about the NBA this season. Just had to throw it out there.
What are you talking about?
Let's get to our preseason previews of all 30 teams. We're going to start in the Eastern Conference, and we're going to go by last season's regular season records. So last year in the East, for the second straight season, it was the Celtics and the Heat who met up in the conference finals, but this time it was not Boston who won Game 7. It was Miami. They made it to the finals, and just like the Celtics, they could not beat the Western Conference champion. But let's break down all 15 teams in the Eastern Conference, going from bottom to top of last year's standings. Let's start out with the teams that didn't make the playoffs, though, Hillbilly. We've got Detroit, Charlotte, Orlando, Washington, and Indiana. Nothing really strikes me as being, oh my gosh, well, it's, something about this team is really exciting. But obviously, these are the teams that are going to have some of the top overall picks that we saw in the draft.
Yeah, I think most of these teams are going to be right back in that spot. I do think that the Pacers, though, they look pretty exciting. They've got a couple of really good players. Tyrese Halliburton had a monstrous summer playing for the United States. He just looked fantastic. I think the Pacers are kind of in a different category, but the other ones, the Magic have a lot to be excited about, but they're still years away. And everyone else in that group's still kind of a mess.
We talked last year, I was like, Paolo Banchero, watch out, because he was really good at Duke, and I think he translates well to the NBA, and he was the Rookie of the Year. He shined. But obviously, you kind of have to build around him. But the Pacers, they added Bruce Brown from the Nuggets and Obi Toppin. The Pacers might, maybe, not contending in the East, but I feel like out of those 5 teams, they're probably the most likely to make a jump into at least the play-in, maybe the playoffs.
Yeah, I could easily see them taking the place of one of those teams that was in the play-in last year.
Okay. Well, the play-in teams last year, let's move over to them. Toronto, Chicago, Miami, Atlanta. We got some more stuff to talk about these teams. But first off with Toronto, they lost in the play-in to Miami. They lost Fred VanVleet. They brought in the best name in the draft, or Grady Dick from Kansas. I'm not going to blur that out because that's his actual name.
Seriously?
But I feel like other than that, Hillbilly, and they lost Fred VanVleet, who was one of their best players. So what do the Raptors have?
Yeah, and they lost Fred VanVleet for nothing. Same thing with Kyle Lowry the other year. They just, Masai Ujiri has a lot of credit for what happened when, they won the championship with Kawhi. But anybody else, you would just be scratching your head with what they're doing. Just bleeding players and not getting anything in return, but they still have some really good players on that team. It's just weird. What direction are they going to go in? Siakam's well into his prime, and then their next best player, Scotty Barnes, is years away from it, and they don't seem to be putting together a cohesive team.
The Raptors did lead the league in steals per game last season, though.
It's a fact.
Just a note. Then you've got the Bulls, who I kind of feel like are in the same position, because we don't know. We don't know when Lonzo Ball is going to play again. They've kind of the Bulls have banked their future on Lonzo Ball, DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine, who are good players. But again, Lonzo Ball has been injured for 2 years or more. Are they even, do they have enough to even qualify for the play-in? Because I remember when they built this up, this group of players, and we talked about it, and we were like, this is kind of interesting. Let's see what happens. And it hasn't worked out too well. And I don't know if it's going to work out this year.
Yeah, could see the Bulls as being one of the teams that maybe the Pacers take their place in the play-in ranks. It's just it's tough with the Bulls with Lonzo Ball. They needed him so much. They looked so good early on when they had him and Caruso giving them perimeter defense. Because when you're playing an offensive center like Vucevic, you've got to make up for it on the perimeter defensively, because Vucevic does not give you any kind of rim protection. And when they lost Ball for, I think it's an open question whether he'll ever play again at this point. It's been so long and there's just never any good news. And, it's so sad. He was interviewed a couple months ago, and I guess somebody, or maybe a month ago, and somebody asked him, like, do you think you'll play again? And he was really upset with the question. He's like, I'm only 25, man. Like, I can make it back. But it didn't sound like he was going to be playing anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
And without him, the Bulls just seem like they are stuck in the middle.
A team that was in the play-in last year, but as we said, made the finals. Miami was number 7 actually in the regular season, but they lost to Atlanta in the play-in, so they dropped to the 8th seed. Like, we had no clue this was coming, and maybe we should have, because the Heat always surprise us. But we didn't think they'd make the conference finals 2 years ago. We didn't think and one shot away from the NBA finals 2 years ago. Remember that Jimmy Butler shot in game 7?
Right.
And we didn't think they'd advance in this exact same position last year. But Hillbilly, is this finally the year Miami's postseason streak regresses? Because Jimmy Butler is emo now. If you didn't see from Media Day, he's 34 years old. We talked about them losing a couple of depth guys last year, and it didn't affect them, but you lose more. Max Strus, Gabe Vincent. At some point that has to add up, even with the talent they have and the coaching and the atmosphere in that organization.
Well, yeah, and also remember, they, as great as it was that they got to play in the NBA Finals last year, they were still playing in the NBA Finals. I mean, they were playing later than any other team and harder than any other team, other than the Nuggets. And that's just a lot of mileage, and it makes it a really quick turnaround of an off season. And for a guy like Jimmy Butler, it's just so much to ask of him, given how much he contributes to that team, both offensively and defensively, how much they're going to need him even more this year. It's tough. But, I mean, I don't know how you could have watched the Heat last year in the playoffs and bet against them. I mean, how dumb can you be? Just over and over again. Like, Jimmy Butler in the playoffs, at least, is among the very best players in the league. Like, I just don't see how you can't see it when he does it over and over again the way that he does. So I wouldn't bet against them, but I do think the regular season is going to be a real slog, and it's going to be really hard for them to keep that up day in and day out.
Yeah, and that's what it was last year. They had a bunch of injuries, and they were in the play-in last year. And it didn't hurt them, ultimately, but, you'd have to think it will at some point.
Yeah, the Heat last year, you think about it, they almost missed the playoffs. I mean, about as close as you can come to missing the playoffs. Yeah. They were right there. And they almost won the NBA Finals in the same year. That's just the kind of team the Heat is.
Yeah. And up 3-0 in the Eastern Conference Finals, too, to the Celtics. And you remember they almost blew that, too. But they didn't. No. All right. Atlanta was number 7 because they beat Miami in the play-in. Really, I think you're one of the DeJounte Murray, Trae Young pairing. I don't think you were as high on that last year, though, when that trade happened. Wasn't as successful as some hoped. But if Atlanta gets it together, you would think their players have to improve. John Collins is gone, and so you'd have to think it's DeAndre Hunter's time to shine in the front court.
Yeah, and they've got a lot of really good tall wings. AJ Griffin had a really good rookie year last year. Coming into a second season, he's probably going to be really good. Jalen Johnson, the other Duke player.
The Dukies.
Yeah, the Dukies, well represented with the Hawks there. Well, it's Quinn Snyder. But anyways, although I guess he didn't pick those players. But regardless, they've got a lot of really good up-and-coming talent there with Trey Jones. And another year of Quinn Snyder. And actually, last year, if you remember, he was brought in late. Mm-hmm. So he didn't.
Yeah, it was one of those things like we never see in basketball, where they fire a coach and they immediately hire a new one. Like, the only sport we really see that is soccer. Like, usually we just see an interim coach for the rest of the season. And you do,
I think occasionally not as much anymore, I guess. That does seem to be true. But you did used to see it somewhat often, but you would just get that interim coach and it would just be one of the assistant coaches.
Yeah.
To do that, where then you bring in one of the best names in coaching right now, because Quinn Snyder is very well respected. I mean, he was obviously, doing very well in Utah before. So now, he's going to get that full season to kind of, try to figure out just how to use Trae Young because he's so problematic as good as he is. I think that the Hawks are ready to make a jump.
Wow.
I mean, I don't see them as I wouldn't categorize them as contenders, but I do think that they're going to be strongly in the playoffs.
All right. Teams that made the playoffs last year automatically didn't have to play in the play-in. Number 6 is the Nets, but I feel like that's probably not going to be the case next year, Hillbilly. They went 45-37 last year, but after they traded Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, they went 13-15 to close out the year, and they lost. Yeah. They got swept by the 76ers.
Yeah, and I guess, everyone saw it coming. I mean, when you lose Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving in the middle of the season,
oops,
you're not going to be as good. That's fine. I think they really liked what they saw out of Malik Bridges or Mikal Bridges, and Ben Simmons has actually looked really good in the preseason.
Whoa,
he is.
Whoa,
you do yourself a favor and just watch preseason highlights of Ben Simmons.
I don't think so.
He looks pretty good. I mean, we'll see. I certainly wouldn't bet on it. The preseason's the preseason, but he looked good. But yeah, I mean, they're still lacking really alpha offensive players. They just don't have.
Number 5 is the team across the river, the Knicks, who 2 years ago regressed. They had a playoff appearance and they won a game, I think, against the Hawks. And the city of New York went crazy. They didn't win the series. They just won a game, I think. It was 3 years ago. 2 years ago, they kind of regressed. And then last year, they're back in the hunt of the playoffs, and they won a playoff series for the first time since 2013. I think I picked the Cavs to beat them, and the Knicks kind of handled them 4-1. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so you've got the most important pieces back, and they also signed Dante DiVincenzo. But they also had, I found this according to ESPN, the second most injury luck last year. But
yeah, I think the Kings were probably first.
Yes, they were.
These are facts.
But if you get another year of guys like Julius Randle, Jalen Brunson, RJ Barrett, and you add somebody like Dante DiVincenzo to that, I still think the Knicks are a playoff team.
Yeah, I do too. And I think they're going to be a hard-nosed, good playoff team. And as players like RJ Barrett, if he could just develop like a consistent offensive game to kind of help with Jalen Brunson, who, looked like a revelation for the Knicks last year. But I think he's probably about as good as he's going to get. I think the Knicks are waiting for that big thing to happen. They are really hoping that they are demonstrating to the league that they are now a legitimate, responsible team. And if you want to come play in New York for the Knicks, it's not a bad time to do it. And I think they're obviously eyeing Joel Embiid as that player now. And I would say there's a greater than 0 chance that could happen this year, depending on what happens with Harden.
Well, that's who we're talking about in a minute. Because first, we have to get to Cleveland, the Cavs, who it was kind of disappointing to lose to the Knicks in the first round because I think I picked them to win. But Cleveland is young and exciting. You've got probably their 4 best players, Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, and Jared Allen, who are all 27 years old or younger, Hillbilly. Cleveland is young and they are fun to watch.
Yeah, they are. And they've got a lot of talent. And it was kind of surprising what happened with New York last year. But, you look at Cleveland and what happened in that series, and you can kind of see it coming a little bit. I didn't, but I mean, a smarter person would have.
Duh.
Their roster construction has some issues. I mean, you've got 2 guards. When your talent, your real prime talent is just, there's so much overlap in their skill sets, that's a problem. Their 2 guards just really remind me of each other. So do their 2 centers, basically. Both neither Jarrett Allen or Evan Mobley can shoot. They're both thin, but they're great help defenders. They can do a lot of other stuff, but they have the same deficits. And then it's the same thing with the guards, with Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell. they're too similar. They need to somehow diversify their talent. I think we're probably going to see a lot of the same from Cleveland, although they did have a good offseason, bringing in some good players, but I think we're probably going to see more of the same.
Okay, so now we can get to the Philadelphia 76ers, who their season is kind of dependent on, I mean, they have Joel Embiid, who's the league MVP, but they also have James Harden, who says his relationship with general manager Daryl Morey is irreparable, and he is demanding to be traded. So I feel like the season and how far Philadelphia goes is probably going to be dependent on if they trade James Harden and what they get in return for him, really, to pair with Embiid.
Yeah, well, I think they have to trade James Harden. I cannot imagine that James Harden is going to go out there and give it his all for the 76ers.
Is he even going to play?
I think he is going to play, because if he doesn't play, then he doesn't get his year towards free agency. The Sixers would own him again next year if he doesn't play. So he has to play. But we've seen what that looked like in Houston when he wanted to leave. It was like the most embarrassing thing I think I've seen on an NBA court.
Potbelly.
I mean, he was in, well, I think he might have actually been wearing a fat suit.
Yum.
And he would just like throw the ball into the stands. He just did not care at all. You know, if they get that, the Sixers, as good as Embiid is and as good as Maxey is, because I think Maxey's ready to just kill it this year, that's going to bring them right down. They have to get him off of the team. I think Morey's being stubborn. Whatever you can get to just, it's over. Get him off the team. He's out.
Yeah. I think I picked him to win the East last year, too, because I thought that pairing was going to work. And they took the Celtics to 7 games. Remember that last year?
It did work. That pick and roll combo between Harden and Embiid was the best thing in the regular season last year. Like, that was the most effective play in the NBA during the regular season. It totally worked. Harden is just a very strange person.
Yeah. This isn't the first time that's happened.
Right.
So. Number 2 was the Boston Celtics, who have been to the conference finals the last 2 years. They won one of those, and then the other one, they were down 3-0, but they came back to force a Game 7. So Marcus Smart, Malcolm Brogdon, and Grant Williams depart. It's kind of a new look, Boston Celtics, besides obviously, Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. Drew Holiday is a massive addition. Kristaps Porzingis is another impactful addition. Cleveland was actually number 2 in point differential last year, but Boston was number 1.
This is true.
I guess it's kind of, for Boston, it's going to be, you lose 3 guys who have been on your team for a couple years. Can you get Drew Holiday and Porzingis and other guys to gel with your team? And I think if they do, Boston's going to be dangerous again.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Boston and Milwaukee are the 2 teams that everybody was really focused on in the last couple of months, because they made the big, really splashy moves, kind of consolidating their talent. And they really kind of mirror images of each other in some ways too, because they're also both frighteningly shallow. Like, neither one of these teams has any kind of a real bench to speak of. I mean, the Celtics have 6 players, and they probably have the best players 1 through 6 in the league. But after that, it's Peyton Pritchard, it's Sam Hauser, it's O'Shea Brissett. And of those 6 players that they are going to have to rely on so much, one of them's Kristaps Porzingis, who obviously has massive injury history. He just had a foot problem, which is the last thing you want to hear. He had that over the summer. And then Al Horford, who I think is turning 67 this year. So they're relying on them, and Horford does keep chugging along, but he is I think he's as old as LeBron or close to it. So I don't know. I think it's tough to count on them when your backup is Luke Cornett. It's just, they have some major depth problems. I also think they got rid of a lot of the attitude on their team, like a lot of the kind of locker room players that were just not going to go down without fighting, like the Grant Williams, the Marcus Smart. They just shipped them out for, I don't think Kristaps Porzingis is really going to be a big locker room presence. I think that for the Celtics...
Well, physically he will be.
No, physically he will be. I mean, he is a very big guy. But, I don't know that he's really going to be the vocal presence that they need. And I don't know if Tatum's ready to do it or not. And I think that's how far the Celtics go. If Tatum is ready to take that extra leap to being the guy that you can count on, like to get into like Butler's territory, where like you can be that kind of transcendent playoff talent, where you can just really strike that kind of fear in the other team. I mean, teams were terrified of Jimmy Butler last year. Like he made Drew Holiday, who is supposedly the great defender, look horrible last year. He could not defend him. So, it's just going to, however far Tatum kind of progresses down that line, because they don't really have anybody else on that team that can take over. I mean, a lot of people are applauding the acquisition of Drew Holiday for Marcus Smart. That's not exactly how it worked out, but, and I kind of got to question it when having watched the Bucks very closely last year, Drew Holiday was just bad in the playoffs. At least offensively, he was not good. And so the idea like that maybe they're better with him than Smart, who didn't have the best offensive reputation, I think it's a little questionable. I mean, 3 years in the playoffs for Drew, the last 3 years with the Bucks, his field goal percentage was 40%, 37.9%, and then 40%. That's awful. Like, and he is a volume shooter too. It doesn't stop him from shooting a bunch. And then his 3-point percentage at the point guard position was 30%, 31%, and 28%. Those are horrible numbers. And it really got the Bucks in trouble a lot. Whereas Smart was shooting better than that. I mean, he was shooting like 36, 37% from three during that time period.
That's a lot of numbers.
So I don't know that they actually got as much better as, a lot of the pundits think. But I think they are still just by default almost number 2 in the league or in the conference.
Well, you had a small sample size last playoffs for Drew Holiday, so, only 5 games.
Well, sure. Thanks to Jimmy Butler, who humiliated him.
That's right. Okay. All right, Hillbilly. I'll let you take it. I'll let you take this one. Milwaukee Bucks.
Right. And I think the Bucks are in an even worse position than the Celtics when it comes to their depth.
Oh my gosh.
It is terrifying what they're going to have to rely on next year. And they're going to have to figure it out. And they've had that problem for a little while. I mean, Grayson Allen was a starter in the playoffs for them. And unfortunately for Grayson Allen, the thing that he is the best at is illegal in the NBA.
That's right.
I think it's actually assault. So, and that sucks for him, but he really probably shouldn't be a playoff rotation player. He's a total defensive liability. He's pretty good shooting, but
well, it's a good thing he's not there anymore.
Yeah, so they got rid of him, but he was sharing time with Pat Connaughton, who's now also like Pat Connaughton couldn't start over Grayson Allen last year, and now Pat Connaughton is sliding into that role. And then other than Bobby Portis, they just have nobody on their bench. So they are really going to have to hope that Brook Lopez, Damian Lillard, all of them stay healthy. Otherwise, they're going to have a really hard time, and it's going to be a long regular season of them trying to stay up towards the upper ranks of contention with a team that shallow. That means they're going to have to play those stars a lot, which is going to matter come playoff time. But the Dame and Giannis pick and roll is going to be the best thing in the NBA this year. Like there's just at the end of the day, and that's why I would pick the Bucks over the Celtics, because you've got to have, well, no, as far as
surprise,
you've got to have that thing that you can go to when everything else is breaking down. When it's just a total rock fight, you've got to have that thing that you can still score off of. And the Bucks are going to have that with Lillard and Giannis.
I found from an ESPN article that was published when the trade happened. If y'all didn't know, Damian Lillard was traded to the Bucks. Hillbilly glossed over the big part of the offseason. But last year, Damian Lillard pick and rolls created 1.16 points per play when he or the player he passed to shot, was fouled, or turned the ball over, which is second in the league to Doncic for players who ran at least 500 pick and rolls. And Lillard, we're talking about a player who hasn't played with a current All-Star since LaMarcus Aldridge, and he left for San Antonio in 2015.
Yeah.
So, it's been a long time. He's played with really good players, and now he's going to play with one of the best.
Yeah. And, the person who used to be the second best player on that team is still on that team in Chris Middleton. And, Middleton, was recovering from injuries last year. It slowed him down a lot. He had a bad regular season. But then in the playoffs, it wasn't really Middleton is not what went wrong against the Heat. He actually put up some pretty good numbers in the playoffs last year offensively. Defensively, he still looked like he was still getting his legs under him. But I think there's every reason to think that 1 year further removed from those injuries, he could be closer to what we're used to. And if they've got that and a healthy Brook Lopez, that's pretty scary.
All right, so that's the East. So before we go to our 15 teams in the West, Hillbilly, we got to predict 1 through 8 in the Eastern Conference. So since it's my podcast, I will give you the honor of going first. For your 8 teams, who you think the seeding is going to be at the end of the season for the Eastern Conference?
So my number 8 team in the East would be the Pacers. I think that they're going to have to win a play-in game, obviously, or 2 to make it in, but I think they'll be the 8th seed. At 7, I think it's going to be the Heat. And I'm going to say the same thing. I'm going to say the same thing that I went back and listened to from last year and say that regardless, I still wouldn't be surprised if the Heat were in the NBA Finals. Because you just never know with that team.
Well, last year they beat the 1 seed, the 4 seed, and the 2 seed.
It's one of the most remarkable things I've ever seen is what the Heat did in the playoffs last year. And then at the 6th spot, I've got Hawks, and then 5 Cavaliers, 4 Sixers, 3 Knicks. At 2nd, I've got the Celtics, and then number 1,
what a surprise. Number 1, Milwaukee. It may prove trouble in the regular season, but I'll put him number 1. All
well,
right.
I just don't know. I think everybody else is going to have trouble as well. So
no, well, yeah, probably in the East. All right, so number 8, I also have Indiana jumping up. Number 7, I have New York. Number 6, I have Atlanta. 5, I have the Sixers because I don't know where to put them. We don't know what that team's going to look like in a couple months. Number 4, I had Miami. But again, the regular season could be tough again for Miami. 3, Cleveland. 2, Milwaukee. And 1, Boston. But the Bucks were number 1 last year, Hillbilly, and it didn't matter. So
it did not.
All right, but later on in the podcast, y'all going to stick around because we are going to predict who's going to make the finals out of the East and our NBA champion.
Tell me.
But we've still got 15 teams left to go, so I don't know why you all would go away. It's halfway through. Let's go to the Western Conference and break down the top 15 teams. Start going from bottom to top of last year's standings. We'll start with the teams that didn't make the playoffs. And I feel like just the teams that are in this conversation show that the West is deeper than the East by a lot, I think.
Yeah.
Number 15, San Antonio, who has Wemby. Listen, we talked about last year. Last year, Chet Holmgren was the big, lengthy guy coming into the league, number 2 overall to the Thunder, and he didn't even play because he got injured because LeBron tapped him. He didn't tap him, but you know what I'm saying. But we watched Victor Wembanyama in the preseason, Hillbilly, and he's the real deal. He's the real deal.
Yeah, he is really, it's astonishing watching him play. It's, we say word like incredible and just forget what it means. That it means like it's something that you can't believe. Like it's just not credible. Like you watch him on television and what your eyes are sending your brain is just not credible. Like it's crazy to watch him. I was watching one where he had an alley-oop going and the guy threw the ball just where you would normally throw it. But for Victor, he almost had to duck. Like he had to crouch down a little bit so he could get it. He's got an 8-foot wingspan and he's about 7'5" in shoes. And then you couple that with he looks comfortable taking pull-up 3-pointers. You just don't find people his size. They're all spot-up shooters.
No one's going to block him.
And it's absolutely impossible to block his shot. And then you watch him play defense and with that kind of a wingspan, is probably going to be able to cover perimeter players very easily.
Well, I mean, he is joining the 15th team, but also teams that didn't make the playoffs. The Rockets, who I think are they've got some exciting young pieces, but Dylan Brooks is there and he's already getting ejected. The Trailblazers, 13. They just traded away their best player. The Jazz, the Jazz were doing too well last year that they had to rebuild their roster again at the trade deadline. And then the Mavericks. And I just feel the Mavericks, who didn't make the playoffs, massive disappointment because you have Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving, and you didn't make the playoffs. Like, that cannot happen. But it did. Just a mess. So just out of those teams, Hillbilly, I think it's pretty easy to tell the one that would make the jump up into at least the play-in, or probably the playoffs, but your overall sense, like looking at these 5 teams, I think they're a lot better than the 5 teams that we talked about at the bottom of the East.
Oh yeah, I think they definitely are. And more than that, they're also like, I would love to see any of those teams play. Like, they're all fun. They've got like the teams that are bad, they might be bad, but they have crazy good young talent, like the Spurs. It still would be so much fun to watch them. The Trailblazers just got Scoot Henderson to add to Shaedon Sharp. That would be a blast to watch that team play. The Rockets have a ton of, exciting, young players to watch, watching them either come together or not, but, at least they'd be fun to watch. Whereas in the East, you just don't have that in the lower ranks. But I actually don't think that any of those teams are going to make a jump up.
Not the Mavericks?
I don't know who they're going to bump. Like, I think in the East, they would definitely be a playoff team.
Yeah.
But in the West, I don't know which team I would pick them to bump.
Yeah. I don't know. Okay. Well, we'll talk about that because we'll make our predictions for the West too. But in the play-in, we had some teams that also characterized, just like we did the last teams, exciting young talent. The Pelicans, well, maybe. If Zion, is healthy, he's going to start the year on the court, which is a good sign. Yep. Number 9, Oklahoma City. I know, well, you're going to talk about this in a second. You're really high on Oklahoma City. Number 8, the Timberwolves. They've got that Karl Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert experiment still going on, but Anthony Edwards is the real deal.
Yeah.
And then the Lakers, who have LeBron and AD, and Austin Reeves is a guy we have to talk about because he didn't just play well for the Lakers last year. He played amazing for Team USA in the summer, and they made the conference finals. So 4 teams in the play-in that, are really exciting.
Yeah. I mean, those are all, I think, really good teams. With the Pelicans and Zion, it's sad that Zion can't stay on the court. I don't think the Pelicans have any choice. They have to just keep hoping because when Zion's out there, they're one of the very best teams in the league. They were number 1 in the West.
Yeah.
When he went out, and then they just fell right down, because you couple him with Brandon Ingram and McCollum, and then you've got the kid out of Virginia, Trey Murphy. Unfortunately, he's hurt now, and he's going to miss the first part of the season. But last year, he's just the prototype for what every team wants. A long, rangy 6'8", 6'9" guy that plays great defense and has a beautiful 3-point shot. So, but it's all dependent on Zion. And I hope he's healthy because they could have a really good team.
Yeah. But the Thunder also could have a really good team. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was All-NBA first team last year. Chet Holmgren is going to make his NBA debut if he doesn't get injured in the next week.
Yeah.
And, Hillbilly, you told me this earlier, they have a ton of draft picks.
Yeah,
first-round draft picks.
I mean, Sam Presti's just doing it again. I mean, 2 of the best GMs over the last couple decades, Sam Presti in Oklahoma City and then R.C. Buford down in San Antonio. It's like they're just doing it again. Like, what Oklahoma City is putting together is really scary. Like, it looks like they may already have all the players that they need to be a championship contender. They just need for the players to mature a little bit. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was 5th in MVP voting last year. And that was correct. He was the 5th best player in the league last year. High volume, super high efficiency shooting. He's like 6'6", 6'7" at the point guard. So, even though he's not always putting the most effort into his defense, just his size at that position gives him an advantage. And then you look at the rest of the players on that team and you look at the season that Jalen Williams had.
Which one?
The Jalen Williams from Santa Clara.
There's 2 of them on that team.
Right. Then they were both drafted the same year. So that's always helpful. I mean, Jalen Williams just had one of the better rookie seasons you'll ever see. I mean, he was second in Rookie of the Year voting to Banchero, but towards the end of the year, it really looked like it was close. I mean, as a rookie, he shot 52% from the field for 14 points a game. That's insane. He was shooting almost 36% from 3-point, which you just don't really see rookies do that. I mean, Kevin Durant shot below 30% his rookie year. Like, it's from 3 points. It's really rare to see somebody that good defensively. I think he led the league in steals from the trade deadline on.
How about that?
Just a phenomenal player. You're putting him with Josh Giddey, who is, a point guard type player at 6'8", 6'9", excellent rebounder, just a great player there. Adding Chet Holmgren, who, he almost looks like a Halloween decoration, but he looked really, really good in the preseason. Like you're seeing, and in the summer league. That game between him and Wembanyama in the preseason was just so much fun to watch. They both looked so good. I mean, you've got Holmgren at 7'1", 7'2", that it looks like he's got a good stroke from 3-point. He's really good on the closeout if people attack it. I do kind of question whether or not the Thunder can really play him at the center, because just about anybody can push him out of the way. I think he's got to be playing the 4. Like Zach Collins in the game with the Spurs, who's not a big guy. I mean, he's a pretty slender dude himself, but he was just putting him wherever he wanted. So I think he's going to need some help down there. But, you've got all these pieces in place already. You've already got your alpha player in Shai Gilgeous. Like he is already good enough to be the best player on a championship winning team. Right now he is. With all that, I was just describing, all the players they have, and then you look at what they're bringing in over the next couple of years, and the fact that Sam Presti is going to be the one picking them. Next year they've got 4 first round picks. The year after that, they've got 4. They have the Rockets pick next year, which is just crazy. And the year after that in 2026. So it's 4 in 2024, 4 in 2025. They've got 6 first round picks in 2026.
Whoa.
Where are they going to put all these players?
Well, and that's the thing that's happening. That's interesting. Like when they had to cut down from 18 players, and they dropped 2 players that were first round picks last year, Ty Washington and David Garuba, they got snatched up immediately. They've just got an excess of players and picks. They've got to consolidate that down.
Yeah, but you can do something with those picks, Yeah,
and I think that, Presti is the guy to make a really smart decision there. I mean, if he feels like I've already got the pieces that I need to be a championship contender, he could start trading those picks for picks down the road. And then when he has to pay these players and pay them big salaries, he can keep feeding the machine from all the first round picks that they have in the future, bringing in cheaper players. So, it's really exciting what they're doing. I can't wait to watch the Thunder this year.
Such a shame it's Oklahoma City, though.
Yeah.
Nobody who would want to live there. Okay. Number 8, though, is Minnesota. Minnesota's another exciting team because of Anthony Edwards, and they get really excited when they win play-in games in Minnesota. But are they going to make a jump into the top tier in the West, Hillbilly? They've got really talented players, They do. They've got a lot of really good players on that team, but they do have a massive roster construction problem. I mean, they've got 2 7'2" players there in Karl Anthony Towns and Gobert, and they do not play well together.
They did not look good with those two out there. Anthony Edwards was complaining about, just how he didn't have any space to operate in because you've just got those two guys down there clogging the middle. So they've got to fix that. And I think they have to move Karl Anthony Towns. And they just have to realize that like Anthony Edwards is a future superstar. They need to start building everything around him, making sure that everything fits. They could probably still get something good for Karl Anthony Towns. I think they should get off of him. Hopefully they'll do that because they do have a bunch of other really good players on that. Like Jaden McDaniels, when he's not punching a wall on his way to the locker room and breaking his hand in playoff games.
Oh,
he's a great long defensive wing with a 3-point shot. They've really got a lot of good players there, but they do need to just kind of fix what they're doing.
Ugh. And that wasn't by accident either. Like they traded for Rudy Gobert. They knew what they were doing, and they
gave up so much for him.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is that the guy who did that was a brand new general manager. It was his first year when he made that trade. Mm-hmm. He came over from Denver where he was the general manager. So he's the general manager that put together that Denver team, or at least the biggest parts of it.
Huh.
And then to see him do that in Minnesota, I just don't understand it. But I do think that they have enough talent that they can fix it. I don't know if they're going to be contenders, but they're a fun team to watch.
All right. And then the Lakers. Spoiler alert, I'm high on the Lakers because I don't know how you can't be high on a LeBron James team. I don't care. He's 38 years old. He still wants to play in the Olympics next summer. Like, he's still going at it full throttle with Anthony Davis. And as I mentioned earlier, Austin Reeves, AR-15 is his name. That's... I don't know. Okay.
Terrible.
But he got a nice contract extension, and he justified it immediately by starring for Team USA in the summer. And they added a bunch of nice pieces too, Hillbilly, I think. Gabe Vincent from Miami, Christian Wood, Jackson Hayes. Adding a bunch of that depth, I think, can really help a team with players who, like Anthony Davis, who can get injured, and LeBron James, who's old, can help a team make a playoff run like the Lakers, like they did last year. Remember, they were in the conference finals too.
They were, where they got swept by the Nuggets.
Yes. Well,
I think it's going to help them in the regular season. I don't know how many real playoff players they've picked up. I mean, Jackson Hayes couldn't get on the court for New Orleans. He just can't. He can't put his game together. I think it's the same thing with a lot of their players. Like Rui Hachimura, let's see if he actually shoots. Well, what did he shoot last year in the playoffs from 3-point? Like 48% or something.
That's pretty good.
Preposterous like that. Yeah, he shot 49% in the playoffs last year from 3-point. He's a career 34% shooter. During the regular season, he only shot 31%. Like, that's not going to happen again. I think they've still got some problems relying on Anthony Davis to be healthy along with LeBron James in the playoffs after the regular season, where they just, I know we talked about this with the Heat too, but I think you can see a trend. It's hard to repeat as champion because you have to go so far to do it. And you're so tired after doing it. Your off-season turnaround is so quick. It's also really hard on those other teams that make it close to champion. And the Lakers went all the way to the conference finals. I don't know if a 38-year-old LeBron James is going to be able to turn around after that and have as good of a year. We'll see. I just don't think that I would bet on that.
The Golden State Warriors also have some aging superstars, I would say, but they're, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green are all back. Klay Thompson still had the most three-pointers in the regular season last year. He had 301, but his Jordan Poole is gone, and they add Chris Paul. This feels like it could be, and Chris Paul's 39, 40 years old, I think. This feels like it might be the last year that this group contends, Hillbilly. I mean, just with the ages and, grabbing a guy like Chris Paul, you don't grab him for a couple years. He might just be one and done.
Yeah, well, he might be, and that's fine. I mean, they were trying to get off of Jordan Poole. That was the trade that was made there. I mean, I think Draymond Green was very clear about his feelings towards Jordan Poole. I don't know that he was subtle at all.
Spitting the truth.
So they had to get rid of him. Bringing in Chris Paul, it's interesting. One of the things that the Warriors have suffered from over the recent years is what happens to their offense when Curry's out. It goes from the best offense in the league to the worst. you know. And if you can have Chris Paul take over that second unit, which hopefully he will consider doing, that could be pretty interesting. You do worry about their ages, but Steph Curry looked pretty phenomenal last year. He looked like himself all year long. Klay Thompson, as you said, I heard that stat about the 3-pointers. That really surprised me. I didn't realize that he was still shooting and making that many.
He's still going.
And Wiggins last year had whatever that personal problem that he had that kept him out for a long time last year. Hopefully he'll be back and ready to play because he didn't look like himself in the playoffs. I think the Warriors are going to be a contender this year.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's just the future where it's, questions, obviously. But this year, I definitely think so. Number 5, like the Sixers in the East, I think the Clippers are the biggest question mark in the West, because how can they not be when Paul George and Kawhi Leonard are your 2-star players and you never know when they're going to play,
No, you don't. I mean, it's tough. I would feel bad for Stephen Ballmer, the owner, who's paid all this money for them, if he wasn't Stephen Ballmer. I mean, and worth, $100 billion.
He's got the money.
Yeah, he's just fine.
Get that dough.
But, they really have underperformed because of injury. But if it just so happened that Paul George and Kawhi Leonard were both healthy through the playoffs, I think they're almost as good as anybody.
I mean, we can say that, and yet we just don't know, I mean, I guess we'll see. Number 4 was Phoenix, who was number 1 by far 2 years ago, and then they that happened against the Mavericks in the playoffs, that horrific Game 7 loss. And last year they lost to the Nuggets 4-2 in the conference semifinals. Chris Paul is gone, though, and Kevin Durant, who came in midway through last season, only played a couple of games. He should be healthy to start the year, along with Devin Booker. And Bradley Beal from Washington is in there, too. And so you've got an owner in there now, Hillbilly, who just came in a couple months ago during the season last year. We talked about this last year, his first big thing was like, I want to get Kevin Durant, and they got him. This is a guy who was willing to spend. They just got Frank Vogel, a new coach, championship winning coach, Hillbilly. But the Suns are exciting.
Yeah, they are. They just, we talked about depth with some of the other contenders, and
Grayson Allen.
The Suns have it worse than anybody. I mean, they are as good as Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal and Devin Booker are. The rest of they're going to be playing 2 players in the playoffs that probably shouldn't be in playoff rotation. They trade away DeAndre Ayton as part of the whole mechanism of trades with Drew Holiday and Damian Lillard. They trade away the number 1 overall pick from just a couple years ago that also a couple years ago helped them get all the way to the NBA Finals and looked pretty good that whole year. They traded him away for Yusuf Nurkic, who is completely broken. A couple years ago, he broke every bone in the lower part of his leg, basically. I mean, they called it a multiple compound fracture, which, if that's correct, I think they can't be right, because a multiple compound fracture would mean that you had 2 bones come out of the skin.
Ew.
Which is just, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure that's what that means. But regardless, he has not been the same player since. He broke both his tibia and his fibula on his leg. It's really hard for him to move now. So they're going to be having to start him. They're also probably going to be having to start like Josh Okogie or somebody else who does not have any kind of offensive game. I think it's going to be tough for them on nights where they're not really hot. But Kevin Durant and Devin Booker and Bradley Beal, by themselves, that's 100 points a night. I mean, just those 3 guys can probably get you. I mean, that's probably over or exaggerating it, but they can probably get you at least 80 or 90 points a night just between the 3 of them. Interesting thing with the Suns, too. I mean, all the turnover they've had. I mean, they were just in the NBA Finals just a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
There's only 1 player on the Suns left from that team. It's Devin Booker. They got rid of every single other player.
Fact nugget.
Wow. Yeah. Number 3, the team that was the big surprise in the West last year, Hillbilly, the Kings. They finally, what was it, 17 years since their last playoff appearance? And the atmosphere in Sacramento was amazing for that series against the Warriors. They didn't beat the Warriors, but they took them to 7 games, and they almost beat the Warriors, but they didn't.
Well, and I think they would have. Actually, I think they would have beaten the Warriors, but De'Aaron Fox got hurt, and that's a massive thing.
Yeah, but Mike Brown was Coach of the Year in his first year. I think the competition is probably going to be... the Kings are probably going to be on more teams' radar in the West this year, but they're got the same guys, they're reloaded, and they led the league in points per game last season. They scored nearly 2 more points than the Warriors, who were in second place. Like, they were hot all the time offensively, and that's what made them exciting to watch.
Yeah, but as we talked about before and mentioned, they had the best injury luck of anybody in the league.
Yeah.
They just... now Domantas Sabonis did have an injury that lingered through the entire year that did restrict him. But generally speaking, they always had their players out there. That kind of consistency really helps. But they don't play any kind of real defense. They've got major liabilities all over the place defensively. That hasn't really gotten any better. I think the West is going to be better than it was last year. The West was a little bit of a mess. There was a lot of transition in the West last year. I think they're more consolidated. They're better. I can almost guarantee you the Kings will not get the 3rd seed again. But, they'll still be good, though, because they do have a lot of offense. De'Aaron Fox is, one of the best point guards in the league. Young, so much fun to watch. But I think their defensive struggles are going to give them some trouble.
All right, and number 2, the Grizzlies. For the second straight year, they finished the regular season number 2 in the West, but again, they failed to make a splash in the postseason. They lost in the first round to the Lakers. And John Morant's going to serve a 25-game suspension to start the season. After that, who knows? Dylan Brooks is gone, though. He's making trouble in Houston. And Marcus Smart is out of Boston, and he's in Memphis, along with former MVP Hillbilly Derrick Rose.
Starting the year without John Morant and the cloud that's hanging over him right now, they used to do really, really well without John Morant. And that's because they had, Tyus Jones. But, one of the best backup point guards in the league. He's gone now, too. So they've got Marcus Smart in there. Hopefully he can help. But, starting with that kind of massive cloud hanging over your head. John Morant got into a lot of trouble last year. And everybody knew it. And he said all the right things. And then he just got in trouble again. He just did the same stupid crap. When you see that, it makes you wonder, is he going to get it or not? So I think they're not going to be second this year with that kind of a, problem start without their best player. But when it comes down to it, they will still be a good team with the same playoff problems that they've routinely had, where they don't have enough perimeter shooting typically. They rely way too much on their transition offense to score points, which always slows down in the playoffs. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting start for them.
Yeah, and then number 1 in the West, before we get to our playoff predictions, because I know everybody's waiting for the West and for our finals picks, one more team.
Big fact incoming.
And it was the NBA champion, the Denver Nuggets, who lost 4 games in the entire playoffs. 1 to the Timberwolves, 2 to the Suns.
Right.
And they swept the Lakers and 1 to the Heat. For the first time in franchise history, the Nuggets won the NBA championship. And mostly everyone returns. They have the top title odds in the West, according to Las Vegas. But you've got 2 guys, Hillbilly, who were key contributors last year. Talk about depth, Bruce Brown and Jeff Green, who are gone. But they have the Joker. And the Joker, he treats the NBA as a business. This is his job. He is not there for excitement. He is there for business. And you know what? It's working out for him. Let me tell you.
He takes care of his business.
Mm-hmm.
So, no, that was the attitude after they won. He was like, boy, we did our job. We can go home.
I don't want to go to the parade.
Yeah, just wanted to go watch horses.
That's right.
Yeah, they've got their 5 best players, their starting 5 locked up. Christian Brown's still around, a good, bench player. but they did lose their best bench player, Bruce Brown. I mean, Bruce Brown was on the court when they won the finals. Like, he closed those games over Michael Porter Jr. It's a big loss with him, but Denver seems to be replacing very, very well here. Like I said, Christian Brown is back. He was a rookie last year that gave him some great minutes. Peyton Watson is a guy that they drafted last year that, he was a little bit more of a project, but Calvin Booth is talking him up, saying that he's going to be a great replacement for Bruce Brown and a longer, quicker, better defender. He's the kind of guy that I think he was like number one, or he was very, very high in his high school class and then just had some real problems in college. And every once in a while, those guys can hit the NBA and just explode. And, he kind of has that look. He had a great summer league. Also, Hunter Tyson out of Clemson was a great draft pick. And then Julian Strouthers, probably the second or third best player in the preseason game so far of anybody in the NBA. I mean, he just, considering they're not playing their starters all that much. But, he's had a great preseason. It looks like they're going to be able to replace some of these players cheap. Like, they've got a really good strategy for the new CBA of they know that they have to pay their big players and they have to have a steady stream of good, cheap players. And the best way of doing that is by picking players in the draft who are ready to come into the NBA and contribute. And they seem to be doing that over and over and over again. So I would bet that they are going to be able to replace that loss in depth. Jamal Murray is not going to be rehabbing from an injury this year like he was in the regular season. So I think he's going to be closer to the playoff Murray that we see, where he was just so good last year. And, I said earlier that Damian Lillard and Giannis are going to have the best two-man game in the league. They're going to take that title from Jamal Murray and Jokic probably, but it's going to be really close. Those two are just incredible. And Jokic just continues. I think we all knew. I mean, the advanced stats last year were saying that Jokic was far and away the MVP. But nobody wanted to give it to him because he just doesn't play defense. Except that, when you watch him, he does play smart defense. He just doesn't play athletically outstanding defense. And just kind of gets the job done. At the end of the day, I think the Nuggets are probably going to just take care of business in the regular season, still be the number one seed.
Ooh, well, hold on, Hillbilly. We haven't gotten there yet. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, now we're there.
Bro, chill.
Those are our 15 teams in the West. And now we got to make some predictions. Our 1 through 8 in the West. Hillbilly went first with the East. So I'll go first with my Western Conference predictions. 1 through 8. Number 8, I think, is going to be the Thunder. I think they make it to the playoffs. Number 7, I've got the Kings. They're not going to be number 3, but I still think they'll make the playoffs. But they would be in the play-in there. Number 6, I have the Mavericks, because the Mavericks were in the Western Conference Finals 2 years ago, and just Kyrie Irving, Luka Doncic. I mean, who knows what Kyrie Irving's up to right now, but, he could be up to something and tank the whole team. But he signed an extension or a new contract in Dallas. I just have to think that they are going to be better. Number 5, the Clippers. Again, they could be number 1. They could be out of the playoffs. You just don't know. Number 4, I've got the Lakers, 3 the Warriors, 2 the Nuggets, and I think the Suns will actually finish on top of the West. Because you know what? Sometimes it's like the best teams don't finish first in the Western Conference, so Billy. And the Suns aren't the best team of the Western Conference, but if you have the best regular season,
Yeah, except that the Nuggets are a regular season machine. I mean, they cruised last year. They wrapped up the number 1 seed so early last year that it probably cost Jokic the MVP. Because he started sloughing off because they just didn't have anything to play for anymore. And I think that really helped give it to Embiid. I've got at number 8, the Thunder.
Oh.
At number 7, the Timberwolves. At number 6, I have the Pelicans. I am just going to believe that Zion Williams is going to be healthy. Or he's gonna give them like 50, 55 games, hopefully. And if he does that, I think they will be that high up. And something to really be afraid of in the playoffs if he's healthy. And then at number 5, I've got the Grizzlies. I do think they're going to take a step down, without having John Morant for such a long period in the beginning. Then the Lakers at 4, the Suns at 3. I've got the Warriors over the Suns. I kind of question that one a little bit, but I just think that at the end of the day, the Warriors, they've got more depth. They can withstand more regular season bumps than the Suns can. And then the Nuggets, just because, as I said, they're such a well-oiled regular season machine. It doesn't look like Jokic has to exert that much effort to dominate.
Yeah. I mean, the fact with the West is I could see the Pelicans and the Timberwolves in there too, and the Grizzlies. Like, I didn't even have the Grizzlies in there. It's just, you have so many really good teams that, I mean, it could be any order.
You do, and that's why that's why I'm picking the Mavericks not to make it, but I mean, they're obviously a playoff. The Mavericks. Yeah. It's just, I don't know which one of those teams I would bump. I guess it's going to be the Pelicans because Zion probably won't be healthy. And I hate saying that, and that sucks. But
Zion. All right. So, final thing here, Hillbilly. We've got to make our predictions for who's going to win the championship. Who are the Bucks going to face in the NBA Finals?
It's so hard to predict, what's going to happen with injuries. All these teams are so shallow these days, just because the talent is so spread out, which is a good thing. But, I think the best chance has to be the Nuggets. I think they're the least likely to have major injuries. Jokic just doesn't seem like the type that's going to get hurt a lot.
Yeah.
And they just won the championship. I think they're going to do a lot of the same things that they did last year with Jamal Murray being better. So I think they're probably going to be going up against the Bucks.
Okay. Oh, the Bucks. Well, lucky for you, I also picked the Bucks to win the Eastern Conference. How about that? So it is going to happen. But for the West, I picked the Lakers. And I picked the Lakers because the script writers are going to make it happen, Hillbilly. If you didn't know, a former player exposed the NBA for, it's a script. It's written down. Everything is scripted in the NBA. And the script writers are going to make LeBron James win his final NBA title this season with the Los Angeles Lakers.
Are you sure?
You know what? If it is all a script, that makes me even more excited to watch it. The fact that they are that good, that they can do those kinds of amazing things just on demand as part of a script, that's beyond everything.
Vibes. And you know what? The writers are back. They're not on strike anymore, so we're going to get some good stuff.
I guess not.
No.
Although they probably would have hired scabs for that kind of work. But.
All right, so Bucks how are the Bucks going to beat the Nuggets, Hillbilly?
Well, I don't know that they are. That's one so close. I mean, I think they probably will be if they're healthy, because I think Brook Lopez and Giannis, they may actually be able to give Jokic trouble. I mean, those two are so good defensively. Definitely the best two interior defender teammates in the league. If anything can slow down Jokic, I would think it would be that. And I don't think that the Nuggets or anybody else has something that can really slow down that Lillard Giannis team, if it turns out to be what we thought it was or what we think it'll be. So with that, I think I'd probably pick the Bucks.
Dang.
Oh, wow. What a surprise.
Well, the Bucks also didn't go very far in the playoffs last year. Giannis has had a lot of time to sit around and stew. Damian Lillard obviously didn't play in the playoffs last year. The Nuggets went all the way to the finals. I mean, it's going to be tough. I mean, Jokic is just that kind of player that, we talked about how in order to win a championship, you have to have that kind of offensive go-to thing that even in a real rock fight will always work for you. And Jokic is like the living embodiment of that. I mean, the final game of the finals against the Heat, I don't know if you remember it, but I mean, it was a total rock fight. Nobody was making anything. Jimmy Butler was 5 of 18.
Yeah.
Gabe Vincent was 3 of 13. Strus was 5 of 12. Jamal Murray was 6 out of 15. Michael Porter Jr. 7 out. Nobody had a good game except for Jokic, who was 12 for 16.
Cool facts, bro.
He shot like 80%, or I guess 75%, which is
Clutch.
Just like everybody else can't play, but he still gets it done. But I think that Lillard and Giannis are also in that category too. I would put it on them.
Okay. I think we're both wrong, actually, because 2 years ago, the Heat were in the Eastern Conference Finals. Last year, they're in the NBA Finals. They have to win the championship this year, Hillbilly. I mean, the Miami Heat are going to win the NBA Finals. Come on.
Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
imagine how tired Jimmy Butler must have been at the end there. I mean, you could see it. You could see it in the shooting stats that I was just talking about. He was completely spent. The amount of effort that that man put in to that playoff performance last year is really something.
And he'd have to do it again, too. All right, Hillbilly. Yeah. With that, I mean, that's our NBA season preview. I'm excited about watching basketball again, not just because we haven't had it for, or competitive basketball at least, since June, but I feel like it's another year where you've got a ton of teams, not just at the top, that you go on there and you click on League Pass and you're like, oh, this team is going to be fun to watch. It's just a really talented league.
Yeah, it definitely is. I think that the NBA is entering into a period where they just have more talent. And I think it's coming from a couple of different directions. I mean, one, you have all of these older players that are still playing at all pro levels, where you just didn't really see it that much before. I mean, LeBron is 38. Is he going to be 39 during the regular season?
Oh, I would assume.
But, he's obviously still playing at an extremely high level. So's Steph Curry. So's Damian Lillard. So's Kevin Durant. All those old heads are still playing crazy good basketball. And when you couple that with the players that are actually just in their prime, like the Giannis's, the Jokic's, the Doncic's, all those players. And then you have these players that are coming into the league more ready to play immediately and make a big impact. It comes together and you just have more talent than we've ever had. And it's just what makes, most teams, except for, I guess, the Wizards, have at least one player that's really exciting to watch.
Man. All right. Yeah, LeBron is turning 39 December 30th. So he'll be 39 for most of the season.
That's tough. But he had a great year last year.
He did. And you know what? This is coming at a great time for the NBA too, because they're about to start up their negotiations with ESPN, TNT, a couple others, all them for the TV rights, and they're going to get a ton of more money.
They are.
All right, Hillbilly. For the fourth NBA season we're covering, our Zander's Facts senior NBA analyst, Hillbilly, previewing the NBA season. Hillbilly, once again, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
Zander's Facts.
So many facts on that podcast, y'all. Once again, thank you to our Zander's Facts senior NBA analyst, Hillbilly, for coming on the podcast. Y'all, he just does it out of the kindness of his heart and his love for the game of basketball. And so we really appreciate him, as always. And those are all the facts, y'all, that I've got for episode 121 of the podcast. Thank you all so much for listening. And remember that if you liked all the facts that were on this week's edition of the podcast, remember to follow this podcast, download this episode 121, rate and review the podcast, check us out on all the socials, spread the facts, tell all your friends about the podcast, and the newsletter, Zander's Weekend Facts on Substack, and also Zander's Facts on YouTube, because I post all our new episodes to YouTube, usually the day they come out, with the nice background you can watch, get the views up, subscribe. It's all nice. Check out Zander's Facts on YouTube too, and also check out the Zander's Facts link tree, because all that stuff I just mentioned earlier, you can find it on the Zander's Facts link tree. It has all the Zander's Facts links that you need. That is episode 121 of the podcast, y'all. Next week, we are not doing a new episode of the Zander's Facts podcast. It's a Zander's Facts Flashback, our one for October, because the next week, y'all, we got a big podcast. I know it's 2023. It's kind of an off year, but we've still got elections going on, especially where I am right now in Virginia. We've got some massive legislative elections. And so in 2 weeks, we are going to have our Zander's Facts 2023 election season preview, because we got a couple states that are having some big elections that are going to affect y'all if you live in those states. And so we got to talk about them before you vote, even though you might have I've already voted, early voting. But if you haven't, or even if you have, you're going to want to listen to all the facts we've got in 2 weeks for our Zander's Facts election season preview. Set your reminders for 2 Wednesdays from now. And of course, next week, we're going to have a Zander's Facts flashback, and I may have a few new things to talk about. We'll see how it goes. But that is it. that is a wrap on this week's edition of the Zander's Facts podcast. Thank you all so much for listening, and we'll see y'all with episode 122 in 2 weeks.
Electrocution.